Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this edition of the NYU School of Professional Studies Media Talk series, where we'll be discussing the magic of making a book. I'm Liate Stehlik, the president and publisher of the Morrow Group at HarperCollins. I'm joined by three industry experts who represent a different stage of the publishing process, and together we'll attempt to demystify the process of bringing a book into the world and launching it onto the bestseller list, and specifically, how it requires teamwork and synergy among the agent, the editor, and the marketer. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us briefly about your role in the publishing process, how you got there, and what you love about what you do. Josh, let's start with you.
So hi, everybody. I'm Josh Getzler. I'm an agent and partner at HG Literary in New York City. We have 10 agents working in our agency, representing really across the board fiction, nonfiction, children's books, and adult books. I got where I am now by first being on the editorial side right out of college, and then taking a long and winding trip away from publishing for about 12, 13 years into a different world, and then back as an agent. And I really love working with text, and I love working at the start of a process with people who are putting together a book and then seeing what you can do with an idea, with the first draft of something to bring it to be successful. And the combination of working as an editor on the first draft and a business person the rest of the way, and a psychiatrist, and a champion, and a cheerleader all at the same time is what I love about my job.
That's great. Mark, how about you?
Sure. My name is Mark Tavani, and I am an executive editor with G.P. Putnam Sons, which is part of Penguin Random House. I have been with Penguin Random House in one way or another for 21 years, and I've been with Putnam for 6. And I also teach book acquisition and editing at NYU for the School of Professional Studies. I think among the many things I love about my job, the thing I love most is that however cerebral the job can be, it's at all times aimed at a product. And I love the fact that at the end of the day, we get to kind of hold in our hands the work we've done. We get to admire the book and put it out there in the world and share it with people. So that's my favorite thing.
The tangible thing is awesome to have.
Exactly.
All right, Kristin, how about you?
Hi, I'm Kristin Fassler. I am the Senior Vice President in charge of the Integrated Marketing Department at Knopf Doubleday Group, which is also part of Penguin Random House. And I got here because I was once a student in the NYU publishing program. And at the time, I had a conversation with the professor who ran the program about what I might do in publishing. And he said to me, he really saw me as more of a salesperson. And he thought what I would be interested in doing is pushing books out into the world. And he was absolutely right. And I have had a number of jobs in sales and marketing across a number of different companies, HarperCollins, Abrams, different divisions of Penguin Random House. And I rejoined the company last year at Knopf Doubleday Group. And it's been very exciting to work with their team on helping their books find a wider audience.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for giving us a little overview of how it works. Josh, maybe we'll start with you because it all begins with the agent. You're usually the first eyes on a potential bestseller. Can you tell us about that kind of aha moment when you read a manuscript and you know that it's destined for some kind of success? And maybe in a few words, you could give us those key elements. And then how do you think about what editors might be right for a manuscript?
Sure. Great question. And we talk really about the aha moments a lot. As Mark was saying this as well, I also teach a course at SPS in the role of a literary agent. And we talk about this because it's one of the things that's hard to teach, is how you feel it. And my first boss in the first agency I worked with said that there were 3 things that you needed to be a successful agent. And they were taste and luck and patience. and that you could not have just two of them, but that all three of them were necessary. And it's a hard, sometimes intangible thing to go through, but one of the things that you find in there is that luck, where you're reading, you know, at 5 o'clock in the morning, your set of you know, unsolicited manuscripts, and you get something and you say, oh my lordy, this is something that can be great. Or you get a referral from somebody, and it's clear that the person has an it to it. But for me, I just remember that the majority of books that I've wanted to take on, other than the ones that were very, you know, specific, are people where within the first few paragraphs, even of the pitch letter, you're able to see a voice, and you're able to see a life in the writing, in whatever topic it may be. And to me, one of the best versions of that was a mystery novel set in 1666 in York, written from the first person of a midwife. And I was hooked within 2 paragraphs by this writer who turned out to be an American guy, which was unexpected, but where he had the idea in the space of 3 or 4 sentences of telling you everything that you needed to know about the main character, about her job, about where it was in history, where it was within England. And I stopped and I turned to my wife and I said, I think we may have a live one. I have to get this. And I got it, and we ended up selling it. That's one way that happens. Another one is where you have somebody come in and you know that their background is sufficient to make, if it's a nonfiction book, for example, to make their book work, because you know that they know exactly what they're doing. So those are situations where you have the aha moment, where you know, you have an activist writing about activism. I mean, those kinds of things. And in terms of what editors would receive a manuscript, part of what I do as an agent, and really why agents are necessary in a lot of ways, is because we establish relationships with editors. And we spend an awful lot of our time either at coffees or lunches or drinks with editors, or in our case, we often will have whole editorial groups within imprints coming into our office and having bagels with us in the morning and talking about what we like. And we read Publishers Marketplace and see who the editors are who are buying the kinds of books that we like. And then hopefully you see them for lunches and bagels and things like that. And when I started in publishing, again, my wife said to me, wait a minute, what are you doing having lunch? Why aren't you at your desk doing your work? And I said, but this is my work and it'll come to play. I promise it'll come to play. And it did in a gradual way. And then all of a sudden, and when you realize that you can create a list off the top of your head of 12 editors across publishing, or 15 editors who might be exactly right for a particular book. And so those are, from an agent side, one of the most important pieces of my job. And one of the things where if you get the right editor with the right book, magic happens.
Well, that's actually a perfect segue then, that we can sort of talk a little bit to Mark about his role in this. And so let's give an example of, let's say Josh calls you or emails you, Mark. What are the buzzwords or that kind of make you sit up and pay attention to what he's pitching you? I know you get a lot of these pitches. So how do you build up trust to know that when Josh actually calls you and tells you something is good, that you can actually believe that is true?
Yeah, sure. I think that there's kind of 2 sets of buzzwords that I might be listening for when an agent calls to pitch. One is on the editorial side, where I'm just trying to hear like what the project is and how it's going to feel and why I'm going to want to read it. This gets very idiosyncratic, right, for each editor. But like, there are certain things I'm going to react to and I just can't help it. And there are other things that just aren't quite up my alley. But say somebody calls, okay, here's a specific example. A number of years ago when I first got to Putnam, an agent called and pitched a project. This was a novel called The Marsh King's Daughter. And what happened with that book was the agent was pitching many things about it, but right at the heart of it was a certain kind of father-daughter story. Being the father of two daughters, I happen to be really kind of, magnetized by those stories. So there are other things that could appeal to me as well, but the idea is that on the editorial side, there could be something about the story that really kind of pulls me in and makes me feel like I could be the perfect editor for it, and then down the line, the perfect advocate for it. The other side of it, though, is kind of more the marketing question about it. Every editor has fallen in love with books that, are great on the page, but they don't succeed in finding an audience for. And it's heartbreaking. It's one of the hardest parts of the job. And so the ideal situation is you're drawn to what the author's doing on some kind of more editorial or even spiritual level. But then you also can say, and I know how to position this. I know who the reader is, and I think I know how to reach them. I think I know how to message and package this book so that it can find the people that actually want to read it. So I'd say there's kind of two things I'm listening for when the agent calls. A third thing, which is not really a buzzword, but it always matters, is the agent's own energy. I mean, there's a real difference between when an agent is, happy to send something out and feels like it could work, and that in a moment when the agent calls you and says, do you have a minute? I've got to tell you about something. I love this thing. I see it. It makes a difference. So if an agent that I have gotten to know, and either maybe I've had projects with in the past, or maybe I've long wanted to have a book with, if they're really enthusiastic about something and they really want to talk to me about it, or they send this passionate email about it, that makes a difference. Because one of the hardest things that an editor has to do is to prioritize the submissions coming in. We get so many. And the real question is, which ones do you get to first? Because you can't read them all first, right? Something has to come third and something has to come 18th. And so you've got to figure out how to do that. You always want to be smart about it, but you know that to some degree, you're going to pay attention to the kind of things you're asking about, Liate. That's going to help us prioritize.
That's really helpful and interesting. And I think I'd like to touch on the marketing piece in a minute with Kristin, but I also wanted to ask you that once you acquire it, then how do you keep Josh, like what part of the process is he as you go forward within the company?
Totally. So so much of the submissions we get, we reject because they're just not perfect for us or our list. And so we have to just kind of, as quickly as possible and as kindly as possible, say, it's not for me, I'm sorry, but good luck with it. So that's much of the time. But those other times when you really like something, it begins this whole other part of the process. And you've got to figure out, okay, I see it. Now can I convince others? Just like Josh had to convince me, now I've got to convince somebody else to see it, right? And I've also got to make the case not only that it's good, but that it's a good fit for us, which isn't the same question really at all. There could be a great book, like a truly great book, but we could still say it's not quite for Putnam for this reason or that reason. So once I've decided that I think something is good and could be for us, I'm working with my team to try to get them to see it the same way. But at the same time, I'm going back to Josh. And what I need then is a lot more information. I'm saying, okay, look, I read it. I stayed up all night. I did exactly what you asked. I love it. Now, how do I get in position to win it if my team agrees with me, right? That means, first of all, how many people did you send it to? What can you tell me about that? How many are reacting right away, just like I am? Has anybody kind of said they want to make an early offer? Or is everybody being patient, waiting for an auction? These things help me figure out how fast do I have to move, and how much value might I be able to assign to the project when we get to that stage. So then I go back to my team, and sometimes my team just reads something along with me and says, we see it just like you do. Let's do anything we can to get this. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they say, it's really good, but I have questions. Have you thought about this? And is the market really as strong as you're implying? And what about that book last year that was on a similar topic, but it didn't really work, right? So all these kind of questions come up, and sometimes I can't fend them off. Sometimes I just kind of lose along the way, and I have to call Josh and say, I'm sorry, it's just not going to be a perfect fit here. And other times I can go back to Josh and say, hey, I need some help, right? Like, I love it, you love it, but My team has questions. Can you help me answer them? And then another thing that we could do along that same path is talking to the author, or, you know, in the ancient world, meeting with the author in person. Either one can be great, where you can like sometimes fill in a lot of gaps about a project. You say, I think we've got a good read on it, but it would help to know what the author thinks about this. Have they considered this? You know, what brought them to this idea? Is there a story to tell about how they came to write it? Those things. So speaking with the author is something that Josh could facilitate that can be really helpful to an editor.
So interesting to hear sort of that behind this. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something, Josh?
Is it okay if I just add one thing to what Mark said?
Please.
I think it could be useful. Is when Mark talks about prioritizing and the tone from the agent being relevant, which I totally agree. And I know how I say things. I know what, you know, the way that works. But I also know that I only have so many times I can go and say, you got a minute, I have a special one for you, because I know that when I do that, I'm going to have a certain amount of credibility. And if I do it every other submission, then you lose that, because not everyone is going to be as great as every other one. Mm-hmm. And so if I know that when I call Mark and say, hey, I have a live one here, can you really, you know, can we talk? He will know that, oh, okay, let's sit up and you know, it may be a particular kind. And I think that it doesn't mean that the other ones are not great. It just means that there's a reason to talk, or a reason to be a little bit more enthusiastic about something than you might be about your regular one.
I think it's sort of interesting to hear sort of all of the behind the scenes kind of discussions and even almost salesmanship at every level. That's, you know, I think from an outsider perspective might be something that you might not have thought of. But Kristin, I'm sort of curious on your end where you kind of come into the picture here, and where are you involved? So how would Mark come to you and sort of begin the process with you? And, you know, what kind of information does he want? And maybe you can just walk us through like a recent campaign that you did in terms of how you worked with the editor as well as the agent throughout the whole process.
Sure. So on the acquisition side, marketing can be brought in one of two ways. The first way can be a bit of what Mark was describing, talking about the possibilities for the book and where we think the audience is. And do we think we could reach that audience, and do we think we could do it effectively? And, you know, I feel like our marketing teams, we know that we're in the business of executing on hopes and dreams. These authors poured their hearts and souls into their work, and it is up to us to help them find an audience. And so what I often tell my team is, you should answer honestly about what you think the potential is, and if you think you can do the work to find that audience, and if you're willing to commit to that work for a year. And if you would be excited about that project, because there are all kinds of sales comps that we can find. Any book can surprise us, but you really have to know if you have the passion and the vision to get that book in front of the reader that makes sense for it. So that's one way we can be brought into the acquisition process. And another way is we're often called upon to make the pitch for why an author should choose us. And that's a lot of fun. I mean, I find that one of the most satisfying parts of the business, because, you know, often in the auction process, the author is choosing between a number of publishers, and it's often incumbent upon the marketing team to put together the story of why this publisher is the right home for them. And then when you help the editor win that book, that can be really, really satisfying. I mean, as for a campaign, this is not a recent example. I kind of want to draw on something that Mark and I actually worked on together. Over a dozen years ago, at least, Mark and I had a book called The Passage. Mark found this amazing book by this amazing author called The Passage. I was very fortunate to be in on it from the very beginning. It was an incredible story of the end of the world and love and family and monsters. And it was really wonderful to work with Mark through that whole process in identifying how we were going to get early reads, who the audience, there were multiple audiences for this book, how we could reach all of them in a bunch of different ways, what the creative concepts were for the book, what the advertising rollout was going to look like, and how we were going to keep it going and sustain the sales, and then how we were going to reimagine it in paperback. And a lot of it was just making sure that Mark and the agent and the author and the team were all always on the same page, always communicating, and always really clear about the effort we were going to put into it to make this book a huge success.
So I have to jump in there. That's absolutely true. And one of the things that was so interesting about a book like The Passage was that when we got it, I'll just be specific for a second to set the scene. It was a partial manuscript, a long partial, but still a partial, which is a big risk. It also came in with a pseudonym. It was written originally under a pseudonym. And so there was like this whole first part where I read it and I was like, you know, I have to be so knocked out by this thing because there's these two things that are not strikes against it, but they're challenges. I mean, it's not finished, so the author has this big challenge ahead of them. And also, I don't even know yet who it is. It might be somebody I've published this before. It could be, you know, somebody who I've read before. I don't know. So once I read those pages and I loved them, and then I kind of started to solve those other problems, I shared it with the team. And what was really interesting about this acquisition process, and Kristin's team had a lot to do with it, it came down to a handful of publishers who were really interested in making an offer on this book. And I know from conversations I had later with the other editors who were in the acquisition process, that the visions for the book were not similar. Like it was a really, like sometimes I think publishers probably say somewhat similar things about how a book might be published. I don't know that because I don't always get to find out afterwards. But this time I found out, and it was really, really different. And so we had kind of put our vision forward for, we have these pages, we have this passionate response, this is how we see this book publishing. And as much as any book I've ever worked on, we executed on that exactly. And it wasn't even just for one book, it was a trilogy, so it was years of work, right? But what I really found it fascinating talking to editors afterwards when they were like, yeah, we pitched it this way. And I was like, that is the opposite of what we said, huh? Which means that the author and agent had been in a position at that moment to say, there are 4 totally or 5 totally different ways to go here. Which one actually rings true with us? So beyond an editor saying, I love your book and I'll help you with it, which I'm sure every editor said, there was a vision had to be presented for how the book might be published. And I feel like there was a real chance in that case for publishers to distinguish themselves. And in our case, it worked out.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting fact, how it came to be. I wonder, Josh, I know you weren't the agent on that particular project, but are there things that when you're working with authors in terms of being in an auction that you're encouraging them to listen for, to keep in mind, such as the things that Mark was talking about in terms of vision? And
You bet. And I have 2 specific examples for that, which were very, very different, but very much on point to this. Because there are frequently situations where the last people who are involved in an auction will be presenting pretty detailed descriptions of how they're going to publish their book. And one of the first books that I ever that I ever agented that was published was in an auction, and the last 2 people gave identical bids. One of them was a very senior editor at a good publishing house, and one was a very junior editor at what might be a slightly more prestigious house. It was a very odd position to be in because they were offering the same money, relatively similar visions, except one of them was saying, I have all of this experience in editing books. And the other person was saying, well, I don't have that much experience in editing books, but my whole team is great. And they both spoke to the author, who then went home and thought about it and came back and ended up deciding to go with the more experienced editor, also partly because he had gone online and looked at the junior editor's Facebook page and said, I don't know if I can work with this guy. So it gets back to the pieces that go into that. So sometimes it ends up being a very odd, little thing that can make a decision. The other one, which also plays into what Mark said about things being presented very differently, I was working with the person who created the Pluto, the mission, NASA's mission to Pluto, the New Horizons mission. And the last two publishers were Picador and were Workman. And they were very, very different kinds of publishers. One of them wanted to do a very photo heavy sort of coffee table book, very artsy, quite commercial, pretty expensive. The other publisher wanted to do it as the very much text heavy story of the way this mission happened, allowing the story to take over more than the visuals to take over. Again, for very similar prices, for very similar ideas, but very different visions for this book. They ended up going with the one that wanted to be more text heavy, which I think both of them would have been gorgeous and both of them would have worked very well, but that was the way that they wanted to go. And that was very interesting. And my job at that point is to give a degree of advice and then say, you really ultimately, if all is equal, you have to be able to make the decision of what you kind of think you want your book to look like at the end of the day. There are times that I certainly have very strong opinions and give them, but in the ones that I was just talking about, I had a rooting interest in both of them, but I was letting the authors figure that out for themselves.
Sounds like the vision for the book is often an important kind of critical factor in how authors look at where they want to be published.
Certainly in competitive situations.
Yeah. I'm also curious because, we talk a lot here about the process of publishing, particularly publishing successfully, and each of you kind of have a different role. And in that, within your kind of role, what do you feel is the most kind of nail-biting, stressful part of the best-selling book process? I'll start with Josh. Sorry.
Okay. For me, it actually is the point that we were just talking about. It's more when you have had your first offer, and there are still people outstanding. Mm-hmm. And you are going around, and I try not to jump the gun on talking to editors about interest in the book until I know that it's really interest. Until either I have an offer in hand or am expecting it imminently and it's not likely to go away. And then it is the most nail-biting piece of that is anybody else going to come to the party? Mm-hmm. Is it going to be a really competitive situation? Is it going to be that the first person who came in is the person and either has scared everybody else off because it was either quick or aggressive or whatever it's going to be? Or is it that that's the person who recognized it and is the perfect person for it? So, but in terms of actually biting my nails, the period right before you close when you're waiting to get offers is the one for me.
And then Mark, how about you?
Well, similar part of the process, other side of the table, the most nail-biting among many nail-biting parts of this process is when you're in a competitive auction as an editor and you really love a project and you really think it's perfect for you and your house, and you put forward all the passion you can. You spoke with the author, you wrote a love letter about why you think it's a perfect fit and all this. And then you've put it all out there in the agent's hands, and then they say, I'll get back to you tomorrow. And you're like, okay, I'll just sit over here and act like I'm not thinking about it nonstop. But it's nerve-wracking in a way, in part, not only because you just want the project, but it's like, I find it very interesting when I look back. As I said, I've been with Penguin Random House from one way or another for 21 years. But when you look back at an editorial career, it's sometimes really interesting to me to see how few projects can dictate an editor's path. Like over time, you gain a reputation. You work on these sorts of books. This is your style. These are the agents who send you the most, and whatever. But if you had missed that one acquisition, you might not have become the person with a reputation to work on this kind of book, because you might not have got the next one and the next one and the next one on submission. And so there's no wrong answer, right? Like there's no wrong path for an editor, whatever your path is, it becomes, but even so, it feels really like important every time you get a book that you love and you think this becomes part of my path. And if I miss it for any reason, something even that I can't control, my path changes. So anyway, that's, for me, that's definitely the most nerve-wracking part of it.
That definitely sounds nerve-wracking. The fork in the road. So Kristin, what about you in terms of that sort of stress point for you?
Yeah, so my nail biting point comes a year or more later after Josh and Mark's. I like to hit the New York Times bestseller list. So I feel like, and of course, not every book is going to become a bestseller, but it is fun when you have set up a campaign with that as a goal to see that become a reality, because the New York Times bestseller list is still a really big driver of discoverability among readers. It's a powerful endorsement, and it drives people to go look for a book and find a book and think that they're going to enjoy the book. So every Wednesday at about 5 o'clock, the New York Times sends out the bestseller list, and I am in front of my computer or clutching my phone waiting to see it, because I love to try to guess the list to figure out how high we're going to hit, if we're going to hit, where we're going to hit. And one of the really fun things about being back in the office again is it's a publishing tradition to cheer the list on Wednesday when you've had a success. So it's been really fun to be back and be able to cheer the list with my colleagues again every week.
That's nice to hear, because I was just going to ask sort of what the most rewarding part is of your, journey in publishing. And I don't know if that answers it, or if you have more, Kristin, that you wanted to add in there.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is a wonderful experience to have spent all of these years working with people with whom you have a shared passion. Nobody does this if they don't love books and love to read and want every book to be a success and want it to find its audience. So it is really fun to kind of have colleagues where you're all sharing the goal to try to help these authors find an audience for their wonderful work. So it's very satisfying to work with a lot of like-minded people.
Mark, how about you?
It's related to what Kristin is talking about, but I remember a time a number of years ago now where I had acquired a debut by an author who had been rejected many times. He had tried again and again to get published, and he finally broke through with only one offer, which was mine. And we published that book, and it did well. And then we published another book by him, and it did better. And then we published a third book by him. And when that third book published, we had been hopeful for the Wednesday night magic, but we hadn't been sure. It was a very close call. And so he had just gotten onto the list, and this was the first time. And so I called him, and he was driving, and he said, let me pull over. And he pulled over, and I told him, and I had expected some kind of, cacophony, some kind of joy. And I got silence, and I thought, And then he started crying, and I thought, I hope this is the right kind of crying. But it turns out he hadn't told me. And then he told me he was actually in the middle of getting divorced. And that call kind of became the thing that saw him through like the next few months of his life. And it was just so meaningful for him to have done it. And it was just such an honor to get to tell him. So whenever you get to tell an author great news that they've waited for a long time, that's the best thing.
That kind of segues nicely into sort of thinking about, you're all of you have different relationships with the author in the process. And I'm just sort of curious, you probably run into some challenging ones as well as the rewarding ones. And then thinking about maybe the challenging ones first. Josh, maybe I'll start with you. And then maybe you can flip to the rewarding one, which sounds, like Mark has a great one right there.
Yeah. So, sure. And being the first kind of line of defense with the author and the immediate relationship and the person. And I, by the way, I make it very clear to my writers that generally speaking, if they're going to have issues with the way that a publisher is publishing their book, that they must go through me. And not directly to their editor or to their publicist, because I can that shouldn't be their relationship with their editor, generally speaking. And obviously you get people who develop very close relationships with their editors, and you loosen that tie. But it's not just that I'm a control freak, which I am. It is that I feel like having one voice and not having to have me make up for somebody else's complaining can end up being a better way of going about it. And so the difficulty, and it's the reverse of the rewarding part in some ways. The most rewarding part for me is when the author achieves whatever their goal was. And I work early on with them to figure out what that is. For some people, it is to be able to hold their book. For somebody else, it is to make $1 million. For somebody else, it is they must make the bestseller list. For somebody else, it is I have to see it on the shelf at Barnes and Noble. And those all mean different things in real life when you're thinking about what a deal is, and what an author is going to be okay with when they're making their deal. And that matters to me because you can again go to the well in different ways depending on what your author's priorities are. So for me, the most rewarding part is when we're able to do the kind of thing that allows the author to achieve or exceed what their expectations are going to be. The flip side of that, of course, is not simply, oh, we did everything that we were supposed to and it didn't work in the market, because that happens all the time. And people don't sell quite as many copies as they want to, and they want to make the bestseller list, but they don't make the bestseller list, but there are only 15 people that make the bestseller list every week. It is when, for me, the most frustrating part is when I think that I have figured out what the person's priorities are, and then it's not that, and there's disappointment, and there is, and that is when oftentimes the relationship starts to suffer on all the different levels and things go sideways. And we're trying to recapture the good feelings of the start become trickier. And that's the part that keeps me up at night more than anything else, is when, oh my God, I had an unsatisfying conversation with this or that author and they're mad at XYZ, or disappointed in me or in the publisher or in, or in the reading public, or a reviewer who didn't like their book. What do you mean you didn't like my book? And it also goes on my side into when a book has been out on submission for a very long time. And we're not getting the love, and it goes from being a sprint toward success to a marathon toward hopefully getting any kind of an offer. And that ends up being very fraught at times. So those end up being both the good and the bad in terms of author relationships, but it is something when we talk about needing to be therapists half the time, it does feel that way.
That can be a fair assessment, I think. Mark, how about you? Are there sort of more on the challenging side?
I would definitely echo that the most challenging situations are when expectations don't align. If we come at the process of publishing somebody and they are expecting it to come out this way, and from the get-go we're aimed this way, there's going to be tension. Even if we succeed at all of our goals, there's going to be tension down the line. But I also think that even when the hopes are aligned, it can be really challenging when an author just has very different opinions about tactics. This is what we do, right? This is what we in publishing do all day. We think about this all day. And some authors are really good at bringing a fresh perspective to how to message their book or how to reach the public. And some authors have ideas that we can't work with. Like we can't honestly tell them like, yeah, we think that would work. That's worth our time and money. So we try to pull them back over here. So when the expectations or the tactics don't align, that can be really challenging. the rewarding part for me is generally rooted in the creative work. I feel like when the creative part of it goes well, I often feel like a relationship comes out of that allows us to get through all the other parts, because we've kind of learned how to talk to each other, and we've learned what upsets this person or what makes this person tense, which could be me thinking about the author, or could be the author thinking about me and knowing what I'm worried about. A really good example of an interesting project going well that didn't have to, I guess. Earlier this year, I had this great opportunity to work with an author who's been around for a long time, Lisa Scottolini, but she was doing something totally new for her. So I've worked with her before, but this was new, and it was her first historical novel. And it was a really big challenge for her to take on. Like, she knew she was taking on a real challenge for herself. And as an editor, I felt like I was taking on, a connected challenge, right, to really help her through this. And it was a long process, and it was incredibly rewarding. Like, it was a lot of trust and like a lot of honesty with each other about, well, I'm worried about this edit you're suggesting because of this. Okay, so then let's take a step back and think about how else could we get there. And anyway, it was a really great example of what can be rewarding. And I think it actually had positive repercussions throughout the whole process of publishing the book, because we had kind of taken this long journey together, and we were able to really talk through a lot of things that might have otherwise been difficult.
There's definitely a theme of the building relationships here, I think, in a lot of different parts of the business. And Kristin, I don't know, how about for you? How do you feel? I don't know how close you get to the author relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think to talk a little bit about expectations versus reality, I think the biggest challenge of marketing at a publishing house is that you're often called upon to solve problems that are not of your department's making. So the book doesn't quite deliver in the way that we expected when we acquired it. The publicity doesn't come through, or it doesn't sell the book the way that we hoped it would. The distribution didn't get there from the sales force. So the question arises of, what do you do now for this book? And it often falls to marketing to try to figure that out. So what I try to tell the people who are interested in working for marketing, or the people on my team, you have to have a problem-solving mindset, because it's up to you to provide that answer when everything else did not come together the way that we wanted it to. And one of the most challenging things I think I do is I write a lot of emails that I don't actually send, that are given to editors to send to their authors. And I always feel so bad about it, because it's hard to disappoint somebody when it didn't come together the way that they wanted it to. But I think one of the satisfying aspects of it is sometimes you really can solve the problem. I mean, sometimes you can reassure the author that even if it didn't come through the way they expected it to, we're all still behind the book and we'll keep trying. Or sometimes you are able to stick with it and get them the answer that they want, or finally achieve the goal, as Mark said, that they wanted for the book. So I think that's kind of the challenge of it, but you just have to be open to figuring out how to solve the problem. And I think that can be a very satisfying part of the job.
That's great. I'm now sort of thinking about all of us kind of in our different locations right now. The past 19 months have been challenging for many people in many different ways, but I think the publishing industry, not unlike many other industries, has gone through a lot of changes. Many of us have been working from different locations, not our offices. So I'm curious for all of you, if you feel that there are any changes that are here to stay, if you feel like there's anything that you would love to get rid of or love to keep, as we've sort of learned kind of a new way of working. And maybe Kristin, I'll start with you.
Sure. So one of the things I do think is here to stay, and I don't think it's just specific to publishing, there is definitely a shift in the whole consumer product good business across the board, everything from canned goods to books to everything else, where driving discoverability is now really incumbent on the people who produce the product, not the retailers who distribute the product. So I think that is a change that's here to stay across every business. And I think publishing, I think in some ways publishing is really well equipped to manage it, because we were one of the first businesses disrupted by online. I mean, Amazon was a big player in books before anything else, but it is definitely now more than ever the responsibility of the publishers and the authors to make sure they're driving awareness and building word of mouth for their books, because in a shrinking retail environment that's so much driven by online, we can't rely on browsability and display space and booksellers to drive that awareness for us the way that we used to be able to. I mean, I'm really hoping that a lot of the in-person activities come back, not even so much book tours, but I think the authors really benefited from the opportunity to connect with their teams, with other authors, with booksellers, with the sales forces in advance of publication. It helped them craft their message. It helped them build relationships that were important for promotion. So I hope that we get to a point where we're doing much more work in person again.
That's a great point. Mark, how about you?
I agree that a lot of things will be rethought. I mean, I think a positive thing that I don't think will go away, even if life starts to return to normal, is that I think a lot of people actually in this time of changing their daily routines, a lot of people losing their commutes, things like this, I think a lot of people did come to realize what space books can fill in your life. Like, I really feel like back at the beginning of quarantine, I remember a lot of us thinking like, uh-oh, this is it. It was nice while and it wasn't that at all. I mean, people needed books in their, in solitude and to share with their family, or they were like now teaching their kids at home and they needed books for that. I mean, there was all these new things, but a lot of those new things showed people, yeah, books are a great thing. And in your busy life, you might have gotten away from them a little bit, but they're right here and you enjoy them just like you always did. So I think that was really good. I do hope, like Kristin said, I really hope we can go back to the more social aspects of business for the authors and for us. I mean, I really think that the best ideas happen when we can all kind of bounce off of each other. And I've always been fascinated by publishing being like a party of introverts, right? And like, it's a little hard for a lot of us, I think. Like, yes, not going through Penn Station every day is a wonderful part of my life right now, but I miss being in the office often, and I miss seeing my colleagues regularly, and I miss accidental meetings and things like that. And I do think those things benefit the industry. So I am hopeful. And the last thing I would say along those lines is, like, for an editor, a big part of the job is networking, and you can only have so many Zoom coffees before you're just done having Zoom coffees. So I really am looking forward to being able to come back someday.
I think those are really great points too. And I know a lot of people felt really sort of buoyed by the book sales and the people reading more books in the pandemic, and hopeful that they'll continue. I think that really kind of helped people get through things. So that's been nice to be a part of that kind of industry, for sure. And Josh, how about you? What have you seen from your end?
So first of all, I agree with Mark about the desire to return to in-person coffees and lunches, because I feel like I have had a lot of phone calls and a lot of Zoom discussions about lists, but it's different and it's not as personal and relaxed in the way, and you don't do as many because, and I find that it's much more with people I know. But I also miss the people I know and I'm friends with during the course of it. I also miss conferences, whether they are author-driven or industry-driven ones. I always went to the London Book Fair. I always went to BoucherCon. I always went to Thriller Fest, and have made a tremendous number of friends who are and are not my clients, and who I really enjoy talking to and being with, and it feels like being a little bit like part of a club, and that's really lovely. And I know that authors often feel that as well. There are things that will happen to those kinds of conferences that will make them better environments, but that's a different panel discussion entirely. But the other thing that I discovered on a really weird individual practical level is I've stopped using paper to a very strong extent. I had to work out of my bedroom for a year and a half and did not have room to create the mess that I had for all the time that I was in an office. So when we just moved back into a new office, I created a space that was a desk that needs to be clear and not printing out everything that I have. And I feel like from either an environmental or a sustainability kind of standpoint, that's going to serve me well. But I definitely changed the way I work, in that I got more used to digital ways of working than the older way that I had. The other thing that I think will be different is that for foreign rights in particular, from an agency side, and possibly true on the publishing side when you control rights, is that it has become much easier to have conversations with foreign publishers and co-agents dealing with rights issues than it ever has been. Yeah, we would do phone calls once, and we would meet 3 times a year at different conferences that were international. But now I'm having many more conversations. I think that it will stay that way, where our rights directors will be talking much more often face to face, even if it is over Zoom, with the people on the other sides of the ponds, to make that kind of 360-degree selling a little bit more efficient.
I think those are all great points. I think, we as we talk about it, we realize how social of an industry books actually are, despite them, sort of more of a solitary experience when you're reading them. So I think that's kind of might be interesting for people to know. And I think, we obviously may have some aspiring authors sort of listening in to this presentation. So I'm wondering if maybe each of you could give one piece of advice to an aspiring author in terms of what they would need to do and what they should think about. And maybe Josh, we'll start with you since you're at the beginning again.
Sure. I think that for an author coming to me, one thing to understand is that if I do not take your book, it's not necessarily because it's bad, which I hear over and over and over again, but rather because either it doesn't fit with what I do, or there's something about it that doesn't make me believe that it will sell as vigorously as it would need to for the amount of time that we would need to work on it. But that doesn't mean that sentence by sentence, it's, that's the value judgment I'm putting on it in terms of quality. Sometimes it is, but that's not the point. The point is really that I'm looking at something, yes, very much, it has to have the quality for me to get to the next level, but there are other things besides the sentence by sentence writing that make my decision process as to whether I'm going to try to take a client on. So that's my piece of advice, is stick, and other agents will have very different priorities and different things that they're looking for.
That's helpful. Mark, how about you?
I have 2 pieces of advice that are linked together. The first is, whatever happens, don't give up. So I was listening to a podcast just recently where I heard that when Walt Disney went to get financial backing for Snow White, he was turned down for a loan 300 times. So 300 times he said, nope, somebody else will get this. And eventually 301 said yes. And he went on to make a movie that changed cinematic history and made him a lot of money. So like Josh is saying, for reasons of quality or reasons of market conditions or whatever, people might say no to the first thing you come up with or the third thing you come up with or whatever, don't give up. But the second thing I would say is also don't rush it. I feel like there's always these celebrations of, 40 under 40 or 30 under 30 or 10 under 10. And it's like, that's not the only metric, right? About how fast you published the work you believe in. So it's not that you should take, you should put it away for years and years and years, but you should wait until you're really ready to dive into the process for all it's worth.
And Kristin, how about from your end?
So I would suggest to anybody who wants to write anything, start getting in the habit now of talking to your audience. And it doesn't have to be on every single platform that is. Pick what you're comfortable with. If you're doing a lot of research and you have a lot of information to share, maybe take to Twitter. If you really love doing video, think about TikTok or Instagram. If you have more of a a practical bent to what you're trying to say, start developing your LinkedIn. But get in the habit of talking to readers. Pick the one platform that feels really comfortable to you and start practicing in it, because you're going to have to engage directly with your audience, and you should start testing the waters and figuring out how you're comfortable with doing it and how you can be authentic with it.
That's some great advice. So I thank you panelists. I mean, for me, it was really interesting to be able to hear everybody's opinions and sort of get more insight, I hope, for the people that are listening in on the process of kind of making a book successful. So
thank you, Liate.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Liate.
Thank you so much.